The conflict in Syria rages on. New elections now set while a defiant President Assad refuses calls from the West to step down. As casualties mount, more chemical weapons removed and destroyed, and 2.5 million refugees now in neighboring countries. What's next for the embattled country? We'll talk with a former U.S. ambassador to Syria and later an Assad ally. Hello, I'm Anand Naidoo in Washington, D.C., and this is The Heat. It's been 3 years since a political uprising against President Bashar al-Assad's government began in Syria's Daraa province. More than 150,000 people, many of them civilians, have been killed, with 2.5 million now refugees in neighboring countries. Meanwhile, in Damascus, a defiant Assad, backed by Russia, refuses calls from the rebels and the West to step down, setting new presidential elections for early June. We get the latest now from CCTV's Natalie, Carney, who joins us from Istanbul. And Natalie, President Assad appears to be talking now from a position of strength. As we've just been reporting, he's called new elections. He says that the war has reached a turning point, that he has the upper hand. So does he have the rebels on the run right now?
Well, the Assad government and the forces have been recapturing steadily some key rebel-held towns and roads, which certainly give them some air of confidence and sort of put a lot more pressure and make it much more difficult for the opposition. But I think the announcement of the election is something very crucial. The government has said the whole time that Assad will not step down and that they will use these elections to really sort of provide the voice of the people within Syria. And then Assad will act based on that democratic voice, as they would like to call it. The elections have now been called, the presidential elections have now been called for June the 3rd. Assad has not said specifically that he will rerun, but it is expected that he will rerun for a third 7-year term. But as we know, it's quite unclear as to whether this will really change anything. The Syrian government has opened the door to potential contender in this presidential race, something that we've never seen before. Assad nor his father have ever had a presidential contender. But with that, it comes with sort of a laundry list of requirements. This contender must have lived in Syria for the last 10 years, must not have any other citizenship, must not have a criminal record, and most importantly, must have the support of 35 lawmakers in parliament, a parliament which, as we know, is very much dominated by Assad loyalists. So that brings a question of fair and balanced, presidential candidacy. What we're also concerned about, of course, is under which these elections will be held. The country's going through a civil war in which there's intimidation, there's security concerns, there's fraud concerns. How will many of the people within the rebel-held areas vote? How will those in the Assad stronghold areas vote? Many of them feeling very pressured by either side. So there's strong concerns there from an international level. And the UN envoy to Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, has previously said that these elections could quite very much jeopardize the peace process, in the sense that it would quite potentially kill any interest the opposition may have with sitting down with the government. So a lot to consider going forward, but it does appear that Assad at this current stage is feeling very optimistic.
Okay, let's look at one area of agreement between President Assad and his Western critics, and that is the decommissioning and destruction of the chemical weapons stockpiles that Syria has. That has already started. A number of the weapons have already been destroyed. But what is the status of that operation right now?
Well, currently the body that's working on this, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, in a joint mission with the UN, are on the ground in Syria. They're looking at the inventory, they're collecting the inventory, packaging it, sending it to the port of Latakia, where it's then going on to ships and further abroad. But what they're complaining about at the moment is a list that was provided to them last year by the Assad government that basically detailed the stockpile that the country had. They say that there's a lot of questions within this list. Since these questions have been brought up, the government has turned around and provided them with a new list which they are going to have to go and verify, of course. But with this new list, they've also provided a new deadline. The deadline was previously June the 30th to be rid of all the chemical weapons within Syria. The Assad government has now moved that forward, and they say that to the date of April 27th, the end of April, is when they're willing to hand over all their stockpile. So we'll see how that goes forward, but there is a lot of concern that there could be a stockpile of chemical weapons that we don't know about, that is not on that list, that the UN don't know about, and that is a big concern for a lot of the opponents of the Assad government at this point.
Okay, Natalie, we have about a minute left. Could you give us some idea of the humanitarian situation in Syria right now? We know that it has been getting steadily worse since this violence broke out, and there are millions of people who are now refugees. There are also millions of people displaced in the country. So what is the humanitarian situation like right now?
It's a dire humanitarian situation. Here in Turkey alone, one of the neighboring countries that have taken in these 2.5 million said refugees, we're harboring about 1 million people here in Turkey at the cost of nearly $2 billion US. There's 21 camps set up along the border, and it's said that only a quarter of the refugees that are registered are actually living in those camps. Many of these people are not registered, so they cannot work in Turkey. Of course, within Turkey, it's a different language here, so that poses problems. And people don't see an end to this, so they're very concerned about whether they will ever get home, whether they will ever get back to their old lives at this particular point. So they're doing as best they can. The UN has stated that any day now, the Syrian refugees will become the world's largest refugee population, overtaking the Afghan refugees. So it's a huge cause for concern, and there still is millions and billions of dollars needed to help these people.
Okay, Natalie, thank you. CCTV's Natalie Carney there reporting for us. When we come back, we'll talk with the former United States ambassador to Syria and later an Assad ally. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.